ARC chapter. Now, what does that stand for?
I'm not exactly positive on what it stands for, but it's a nonprofit organization that provides basically meaningful opportunities for special needs individuals, depending on what the special need is. It could be a variety of things. So it's not just autism. It could be Down syndrome or some of the other things. But when our children age out of the school system and become adults, well, then what happens to them? Do they sit at home and watch TV all day? And this is not productive. This is not what we want them to do. So what the ARCs across the country do is they bring them in as a day program, and they provide them with meaningful work opportunities. Some of them will landscape. Some of them may detail cars. Some of them will do some packaging for shipment. So provides them an outlet and an opportunity to earn some income, gives them something to do so they're not sitting around home all day, just kind of bored out of their mind and not really enjoying life. So a lot of our special needs individuals, when they become adults, they want to be productive members of society. They want to work. So what these ARC programs do is they just provide them fantastic opportunity to get out and enjoy life, go for walks, take tours of police departments, and even do some part-time work. Some local companies will contract them out to do some packaging prior to shipment and things of that nature. So it's a great, great working model that the ARC provides, and I'm pretty sure they do this across the country. But that's where ALEC comes in. We are a branch of the South Norfolk ARC. But what I do see is basically all these ARCs across the country mirroring what we're doing, recruiting their own officers, firefighters, and first responders in their respective states, and providing this training just like we're doing. Awesome. And it's really just taking our training model across the country.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that it's something that we definitely need to do in law enforcement. So let's move on into the set of questions that I have for you. The first one is there a secret or technique you can share with our listeners that helps you think outside the box when planning and developing learning content?
So I think what I could relay on that, the secret would be really know your content. If you know your content in and out, you're able to basically break away from the PowerPoint and go into examples. You're not worried about, hey, where was I reading this? Did I lose my place? It's okay. You can break away from the PowerPoint, hone in on your specialty, your expertise, sort of say, and give examples of that, how you utilize that expertise of what you've learned on the job, and then correlate that with work experience. So that's where, I can take the examples of what I deal with in the home with my own child, say from a pain perspective, how her pain threshold may be through the roof. And then I will attribute that for any defensive tactic or taser instructors that are in my class to say, hey, you got to go a little bit easier with this population. And here's why. Their pain threshold may be through the roof because neurologically, they don't feel the same pain that you and I feel. So what happens is officers tend to go a little heavy. So really, to get back to your original question, is know your topic, know it well, hone in on it, and you can break away from the PowerPoint to get into some details and some expertise. And that's where you'll draw in the attention of the crowd.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you brought up a really, really good point about, the pain threshold of someone with autism. We don't really think about those things as officers. And I think that that's where the training that you all provide comes in. It helps us understand as a profession exactly what we're dealing with, because unfortunately, I believe right now, officers don't know.
Correct. They don't. And where I typically get them on the defensive tactics side of the training is, those lessons or techniques that you've been taught in the academy, they are effective on 99% of the population. However, they may not be as effective with a person on the autism spectrum because that pain threshold is through the roof. So where there's a pressure point or a pain compliance technique, it's not going to be as effective because their pain threshold is much higher than yours and mine. Same thing applies with the taser. I get my taser instructors. There's two components of that weapon. There's the probe deployment, and then there's the drive stun. Well, when I have my taser instructors in my class, I ask them, tell me about the drive stun. Well, that's a pain compliance technique of that particular weapon. It is. And that's where that portion of the weapon may not be as successful as the other. And what we don't want to do is you move in and you drive stun, and then you drive stun again. You drive stun again. You don't get the desired response. Your partner comes in. Now it's a double drive stun. And now what we've done is we've burnt the guy about 8 times, when if we'd known, hey, maybe he's autistic and he's not going to respond to the drive stun component of this weapon. It is true. So, we really hone in on a wide array. And that's the experience really of using me as an example. It's the 23 years of experience. So I have experience of being a street cop. I have experience from defensive tactics. I have experience as a canine officer. So I can relate to my canine officers on the street, where you want to park if your partner's dealing with an autistic individual. You want to park your cruiser about 100 feet back. The incessant barking of the shepherd may set the autistic individual off because their hearing is very, very acute, very sensitive. So I have the ability with my experience to hone in on a vast array of the police structure, from chief, administrator, mid-level management, all the way down, even our specialty units, defensive tactic instructors, DREs, school resource officers, the whole nine.
And just listening to you answer that question and get kind of deeper into some of the examples that you just gave us, man, really, really just validates that we need this training across the country, because I had no idea the pain tolerance. I mean, heck, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, and again, what we don't want officers to do is if, they go for that armbar technique and they're not complying, they're not responding. So they keep putting pressure on that joint, and then eventually the limb snaps because they weren't feeling that pain that you and I will feel and we will respond to, we will comply with. They don't. And we're not sure why. It's why you see that puzzle piece for, Autism Speaks, or you see the puzzle piece on the back of vehicles, whether you're at a traffic light. And that's what it is. Autism is a puzzle, and we're trying to put this puzzle together. But part of that puzzle is neurologically, their pain threshold is just significantly higher than yours and mine. So we need to be really careful when we start applying some of our our arrest techniques, or our defensive tactic, counter joint techniques, arrest and control techniques, all of these things.
Are there ways that officers can identify someone that may be in the autism spectrum?
So that's a great question. So yes and no. So typically, if you were to run into somebody that has Down syndrome, you can see, by looking at them, that, okay, this person may have Down syndrome. The problem with autism is, on the outside, they look normal. They're just like you and I. The problem is on the inside, neurologically, there's an imbalance in the brain. There's an electrical imbalance. So their actions, their behavior, their verbiage will be different from you and I. But from the sight, they're going to appear like a typical person. So where you have an autism person that's flapping their hands, they call it stimming. That is an abnormal behavior. But a drug recognition expert might say, hey, that behavior is indicative of somebody on a narcotic. Well, yes and no. They mirror one another, but you got to look a little bit deeper. You can't just go into, hey, this guy's high on narcotics. I'm a drug recognition expert. This is what I see. Yes, you're right. And you have that specialized training. But this is like I had told you, we want to slow it down. Don't just jump to a conclusion, because where it may mimic drugs, in actuality, it could be a neurological issue, i.e. autism. And that's why it's giving the behavior that you see, just this abnormal behavior. So that's really the key, is slowing the response down, being really patient and observing for a few minutes the totality of the behavior you're seeing. Don't just jump to a conclusion that it's narcotic, that it's a methamphetamine, because that's not necessarily the case. Very well could be, but not necessarily.
So with that being said, what are some of the things that the officers could look for that would help them recognize that, hey, this person may be autistic?
Well, it's hard for me to give you that through our interview here over the phone. What we do typically is, when we provide this training, is we will show them embedded videos, whether they're body cam images from incidents that were well or incidents that didn't go so well regarding the police interaction. We will give them examples of, meltdowns. We will give them examples of stimming and flapping of the hands where we show them videos. This is what you're likely to encounter. So where this is an abnormal behavior, and you might initially from your gut say, hey, this is drugs, we're going to show you, this may not necessarily be drugs. This is where you want, we just want you to slow it down. And we try and give them actual video examples of this. So if they were to see that type of behavior, whether the person is walking on their tippy toes, whether they're holding a conversation with their back to the party because they can't make eye contact, whether it's the stimming or the hand flapping, whether it's the rocking or the pacing back and forth, whether the officer asks a command and the individual on the autism spectrum repeats what the officer said, whether we call that scripting. They will repeat what the officer said, and they're not trying to be a wise guy, but that's part of their deal is to repeat what the person said to them. So it's a whole culmination of these various behaviors that they're going to see, and we try and give them actual video example so they actually see this.
Yeah, and it sounds like the key to all of this is for the officers to kind of slow the roll, to slow it down a little bit, and try and figure out what it is that you have.
Yeah.
If you think it may be some kind of drug-induced behavior, maybe slow it down and go a little deeper to see if it is or if it may fall into the autism spectrum.
Sure. And I think, Mike, regarding policing, the biggest thing that I take out of this is we really want officers in their individual states, in their individual jurisdictions, really to find alternatives to lock up, particularly with this individual. We do not want these guys in our booking room. We do not want these guys in our cell block. I gave you examples of the high pain threshold. They also exhibit self-injurious behaviors. So the last thing your chiefs or your captains or your commanders want is an autistic individual in your cell block, and now they injure themselves because they are involved in self-injurious behaviors. Your jail cell is not part of their daily routine. We just don't want them going in there because they will absolutely injure themselves, and they could injure themselves severely or fatally. It's entirely possible. So we really want to get guys to explore alternatives to lockup. In Massachusetts, I don't have to make an arrest. I can go for a hearing. I can go for a summons. I can apply for an arrest warrant. There's a lot of tools that I have where I don't necessarily have to take the party into custody. And really taking them into custody is the absolute last resort here. And that's really the key, is that, the autistic child or the autistic adult, your cell block is not part of the routine, and they need to be in their routines. Any deviation from their routine, you're going to have a meltdown, you're going to have injurious behavior, self-injury, the whole nine. Yeah. So it's really key for officers to work as a team, work in tandem with your supervisors, explore alternatives to lockup here. We just don't want to bring these guys in our booking room. We don't want to put them in a cell block.
And I think listening to you go through that, I think that one of the key factors to working through a situation like this is for officers to communicate, to maybe try and dig a little deeper. And what I mean by that is asking questions. If you have a child that the officer is dealing with and they, are exhibiting these types of behaviors, ask questions. Hey, does your child fall within the autism spectrum?
Yes.
Or is there reason to believe, to kind of pull this information out to try and figure out exactly what's going on?
Yeah, and we encourage them to ask that, but as a general rule, most of the time the loved one or caretaker will quickly come out and let the officers know, officer, I just need to let you know my son is on the autism spectrum. The reason why they do that is they're apprehensive, they're afraid that we may over-respond, and they don't want their loved one to get injured or killed. So it's very common that the loved one comes immediately out to say, officer, I just need to let you know my son is autistic. Really important that the officers know this early, whether it comes from my dispatchers or it comes from the caretaker or the loved one. It's incredibly important that our officers know, not once they get there, even better if they know prior to arriving, hey, the subject you're dealing with may be on the autism spectrum. Because we want them to be able to slow it down, think outside the box, take their time, do not make an irrational response. So the communication is
So
key.
within your training,